Hi, class. I wanted to give a video response. I had a few thoughts related to the argument we read about the justice system, racism, how frequently people go to jail when a white victim's involved versus a victim of color. And then today you gave some further reflection, like looking back at your response and was there biased reasoning? Where did you reason well? Where did you reason poorly? All that. And some of you had talked about finding it difficult to believe that racism could exist in the entire justice system. I mean, that would be like this vast conspiracy. How in the world would that be possible? So in some isolated cases, you might have a sheriff or a jury or a prosecutor or something that might be racist, but on the whole, the conclusion seemed too broad, too large. So that got me thinking. I often think there's a confusion when we talk about racism or race. I think there's at least two types of racism. One is like very overt, right? Like the kind of racism where we say, I'm this kind of racist because I hate black people. I'm white. White people are better. People of color, I don't like. And it's really obvious. I use words that are derogatory. Maybe at worst, I'm violent towards people of color. And it's like a very overt, obvious kind of racism. Certainly, I don't think the criminal justice system is racist like that. There might be a few police officers, I don't think a ton, that are like just overtly racist and hate minority groups. There might be a few judges or things. I think there's a second kind of racism, though, that's more rampant and that I think does infiltrate every organization and almost every human heart, and it's implicit racism. It's below the level of consciousness often. It's the kind of racism that causes me to favor people that look like me more than people that don't look like me. It's the kind of racism where if you go to any church on a Sunday, you're going to see predominantly one type of group. You're going to have black churches and white churches and Hispanic churches. We willingly go to the church we want to go to, right? We choose where we want to go. I don't think that people in these churches are overtly racist, at least most of them are not. But I just feel more comfortable around people that look like me. I like the music better. I feel more comfortable with the pastor. But that gets into all kinds of other subtle things, like I'm willing to give people that look like me the benefit of the doubt, but I'm more skeptical of people who don't look like me, right? There's actually implicit bias tests. You can do them online if you look them up, implicit bias tests. And they've done it in lots of different cultures and have gotten thousands and thousands of participants. And most human beings have an implicit bias. Not just white people, not just black people, not just men, not just women, all people have a kind of implicit bias. One that is most telling, they'll do computer simulations where you put yourself in the mind of a police officer and you're sort of watching a video and it's unfolding, and you'll get a flash of an object in a potential perpetrator's hand or in their back pocket or stuffed in their belt line. And then you have to quickly decide, is that a weapon or an innocuous object? The way a police officer would have to make a very quick decision. If the person on the screen is black, all participants, right? On average, participants will see an innocuous object like a flashlight or a cell phone as a weapon, as a gun. When you compare it to if it's a white person, it's much less likely that people will see an innocuous object as a weapon, right? So people are watching their screens, they're taking this test, they have to decide is it a weapon or not. If the person on the screen is black, you're more likely to see a flashlight or a phone as a weapon, as a gun. If the person's white, you're less likely. Well, what's that about? It's not because everyone who's taking this test is overtly racist. There are implicit, subconscious biases that make us less trusting of out-group members. Right? There are in-group members and out-group members. So that's what I think happens. And if we all have this implicit bias, then over time, it's going to stack the deck against people of color. Because most attorneys and most jurors and most judges and most people who own companies, right, are often in the United States, at least white. So for instance, to see how the ripple effect might work, there was a study done where identical resumes, identical in every way, except the name, were sent out to a bunch of different places looking for work. On some of the applications, they used very white sounding names, right? Rick Cantrell or whatever. And then they would change the name to something stereotypically black or African-American, like Jamal Williams. And they would send these identical resumes out, and they've done this now multiple times. The traditional white-sounding name will get twice as many callbacks as the traditional sounding black name, even though the resumes are identical. Now, again, I don't think the people who are doing the hiring are overtly racist. I don't think they hate black people in their hearts. But I think that there's a twinge, there's like a subconscious reaction, like, I would prefer someone who looks like me. And most people are doing the hiring, not all, but most in the United States are white. So the deck slowly but surely starts to get stacked against people of color because of implicit bias. If black people had most of the money, most of the power, and did most of the hiring, then the deck would slowly start to get stacked against other groups because we prefer people that look like us. But as it stands now, white people are predominantly the ones who have power and money. And so we end up hiring people that look like us, think like us, going to church with people that look and think like us, wanting our kids to go to school with people that look and think like us. We self-segregate, right? And that's the kind of racism I think that ends up creating real statistical problems. It ends up being unjust, and we've got to figure out how to weed it out. I'm going to give a hypothetical. We'll see if you agree with me or not. Okay. So I want you to imagine this scenario, and I want you to try to be as honest as you possibly can be, right? With yourself. Be honest with yourself. Try to be open-minded as much as you can. It's not easy. But I want you to ask yourself this question as honestly as you can. If, when Tim Tebow was an NFL player, so Tim Tebow was playing for the Denver Broncos, he decided that he was, felt led by God, felt convicted to kneel during the national anthem in order to silently protest all of the abortions that were taking place in the United States. Do you think that you would be angry with Tim Tebow the way that many people are angry with the NFL players who are kneeling because of racial injustice? Do you think you'd be upset with Tim Tebow for kneeling during the national anthem to silently protest abortion? I think if most Christians, most white Christians, were honest with themselves, they would say, no, I would not be upset with Tim Tebow. In fact, I think most would say he's being courageous. He's standing up for his beliefs, his morality, his faith. Even though others are persecuting him, he is standing in the gap, doing what's right, fighting for justice for the unborn. Well, if you would say that for Tim Tebow and abortion, why wouldn't you say the same thing for athletes who are trying to bring awareness to racial injustice? I mean, they're doing it silently and nonviolently. They feel strongly about this social issue. They feel like racism is still real and the justice system is not fair. And there's a lot of statistics to support them on that it's not fair, that the justice system is skewed against blacks. So why would you praise Tim Tebow and not them? That's the kind of implicit bias I'm talking about. I'm guessing you're not overt racists. I don't think most Christians are overt racists, but there's just something about Tim Tebow that makes me feel like I'm going to support his cause, and that seems right. He's like one of us. He's a Christian. He's white. But, you know, these other athletes just now seem selfish, right? Imagine the criticisms that have been levied against the NFL players, right? Some of the criticisms are things like, they should do it on their own time. I don't want to see the protest. Would you say that to Tim Tebow if he was protesting abortion? Would you say, well, that's inappropriate, Tim Tebow. Go protest abortion on your own time? I don't think Christians would say that to Tim Tebow. I don't think that criticism would be levied against Tim Tebow. Some of the criticisms I've heard are, they're so spoiled. They're millionaires. Why would they now protest the very NFL that's paying their way? I don't think that would be a criticism levied against Tim Tebow. Would we call Tim Tebow selfish and spoiled if he knelt during the national anthem to protest abortion? I don't think Christians would say that he was selfish for that or that he was being spoiled. So why would we make some criticisms of black players for their very important cause of justice and fairness? Why would we criticize them when we wouldn't criticize Tim Tebow for the very important issue related to abortion? I think it's because of implicit bias. Most of the time that's implicit bias, not overt racism, implicit racism. Tim Tebow is one of us. He's a Christian, he's white, he's a good guy. We don't like these other athletes and what they stand for, but why? Don't we care about racial justice? Isn't it true that there have been issues with injustice related to police officers and black communities? So we have to be careful. I think that this is really rampant. It's in my heart. I'm implicitly biased. I'm trying to be aware of that, be honest about it. And if it's in others as well, then it's going to be in jurors and in judges and in cops and in the justice system. And it's going to be really hard for minority groups to get a fair shake. Something to think about. Just something to think about. I'm not saying you have to agree with me, but this is how I think systems become more racist over time, not because of the overt hate-filled kind, but it's a kind of subjective preferencing. So, all right, I hope this helps. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll see you guys in class.